Okay. So yeah, adding the artifact support. I'm sorry, Milos, when you finish what you were saying.
Yeah, sorry, I was just saying, we had a chat about this with Justin few times, like not something like nothing in depth, but we scratched upon it, and like, I mean, we both agree like having like this support in distribution would be fantastic. But getting it right, that's the tricky bit. Like,
yeah.
I did notice that GitHub recently, or was it GitHub recently started serving the brew packages from registry. At least I did started noticing whenever I do brew update, I started noticing the distribution URLs.
Yep.
And is that working with artifact manifest, or like is that the artifact spec, or is it still the old OCI spec?
It's the original work. Like this is all still new stuff. This is kind of the brew and all the others. Like nobody's actually been deployed this yet. Like we had to get the draft spec done so that there was something to deploy. It was one of the big conversations we get into all the time is the difference between content that's persisted and a CLI. Right? Like CLIs, you can iterate pretty quickly, there's a version check, whatever, but it's the content that we store that, it's stored indefinitely, right? You never know who's going to keep what forever, and others get deleted. So as soon as we start storing content, it's pretty important to get it right. So that's why we've spent so much time getting the spec to where it's at now. And if you've looked at it more than a month ago, it's changed. And if you looked at it more than 2 months ago, it's changed a lot. Like we've definitely been iterating a lot based on feedback, based on usage, based on implementation, going, well, this didn't really work like we thought it was going to be. So it's definitely lots of iterations.
So you guys actually have some sort of some implementation which is actively being used by someone.
Actively being used, no. We're at that first stage where we actually have it working. We've had various implementations of it working for several months. One of the first incarnations was push the target manifest, push like a signature as a separate manifest, and then call a third API to link them together. And that was like, can we get this monster breathing, by throwing things at it. And that helped us learn a lot around how we wanted to build. We knew that wasn't the end result. We knew we wanted to upload a manifest with the information, but what are the primitives that we need for things like lifecycle management and all those pieces. So that was really, I want to say it's almost back in March timeframe. I could be wrong. So what we have now is many incarnations, including going off into exploring what Justin proposed with that PR37, and then kind of coming back to something we felt more comfortable with for the immediate future. So anyway, I've noticed between Sajay joining and Brandon's here, so we kind of have about as much quorum as I expect for a 7 a.m. Pacific time. So I said we'd record it, and I'll do this again for others. So let me jump into where we're at. And I was going to take, let's see, shared screen. I was going to kind of use this presentation Justin and I did a couple of weeks ago as just setting the stage. And then I want to spend most of the time in demos and conversations. But I figured it helps to kind of get your hands on it, maybe not your hands on it yet, but your eyes on it. And then hopefully you'll get your hands on it so we can see the next steps. So obviously this has all been about, how do we enable, this all started actually as part of the notary work. When we were exploring signatures, and Brandon was actually part of those original conversations, was what is the scalable way, what is the functional way that we can push content into a registry that will allow promotion. I used to say move, we don't move it. I don't even like the word copy anymore. I'm trying to use the word promote. So how do we promote content within a registry and across registries? Because that was one of the biggest gaps we had with Docker Content Trust and Notary V1. So I've been kind of using this imagery to kind of help resonate that there's some small vendor out there, they create a bunch of content that they want to publish. Nobody knows who they are, so they go to a big box aggregator, right? It's like you put something in Home Depot, small vendors get big visibility. Put something in Docker Hub, small vendors get visibility. But in any kind of secure environment or reliable environment, you never want to be pulling something from a registry you don't own, much less something outside of your control, on another location for your production environment. So you would import that content into your environment. And with all of this, we want the signatures to be there so we can validate them. We want SBOM so we can interrogate them. And then when we bring them in, we want to stamp them with some additional content, additional signature, or add other things like maybe another SBOM, another scan result. And the thing we took a couple of months to kind of wrestle ourselves over with is, are we going to add content to an existing manifest? But if we do that, then the digest changes, of course, as registry implementers, we all know this. That's not viable because, we can maintain the tag, but we know lots of people do digest-based deployments. They take a Helm chart or some kind of thing, take the tag, convert it to digest so it's locked. So if we have to update the manifest, then we've kind of not in a viable spot. So that through so a lot of conversation, we basically landed on, all right, we need to have another manifest that we can refer to the first one so that we can actually not change the digest and add signatures in the notary case, but add other content as the artifact, the target artifact, the subject artifact was the term we use now. The subject artifact moves, such as the container image. We want to be able to have other stuff be added on to that graph as it's been promoted. So that is what spawned this, reference type conversation, and to have another artifact that could refer to the original one. And of course, there's lots of different ones, and the details here are kind of the things we've already been talking about. So, so we want to be able to, I still use the word copy, now I'm using promoted, but basically all of these things need to be promoted. And, as you've probably seen, a lot of our customers want these registries to be in a VNet. And not just the registries, they want that environment to be in a VNet. So if I'm in Acme Rockets, and if you squint closely, you'll see there's a second line on here, that air gap for the network. Everything that's running into this environment can't reach out to anything else. It can't reach Docker Hub. It can't reach Quay. It can't reach GitHub. It has to be into that environment. So we want all of the artifacts to travel with it, the signatures, the SBOMs, the deployment scripts, the Helm charts, and so forth. And of course, this is just that longer, hey, especially Wayne, we were just talking about, the size of teams, right? How many people does it take to run one of these things? And if now you want to run another registry for WASM, another registry for Terraform, another registry for whatever, right? The SBOMs, every one of these things that come up need a long list of features that customers expect to be on these services. And they're not like willing to pay for them extra. They expect a car to come with tires and brakes and airbags now, right? There's a long list of those security features and reliability features. So rather than build yet another storage service for this, we said, how can we leverage this and cover new ones and existing ones? And again, it's a different deck, so I don't want to get too sidetracked. Yeah, so this is basically should the SPDX community, for instance, the Cyclone DX community, pick it, have to create yet another storage service to serve their SBOMs, or can we associate their SBOMs with the content that they're targeting in the first place? Blah, blah, blah. What else? Yeah, we talked about the not changing. And the other thing is they're separable. So one of the things that I try to talk about is kind of validating content before you pull it in. I call it the Trojan horse. You don't want to pull the container image to then read the SBOM and the signature to realize like, oh, this is really bad. But now I've just mounted and pulled in and likely expanded the content onto my VM that is bad. And if some of the process can get access to that, I've now pulled in malicious content when I was just trying to validate it. So having the ability to tear off the signature, the SBOM, is pretty key to that. So the demo that I'll show is basically you push a container image, you would push another artifact. I won't actually get into notation and notary here. I'll just use generic ones. And then you could actually create a whole graph. If you look at it the thing that we're really trying to enable is you're thinking about that net monitor V1 image. You want to know the signature of it, but you're always thinking about it is what is the subject that I'm talking about, the net monitor image. So I might want to get signatures, might want to get SBOMs, but I don't actually ask it for the SBOM for the net monitor image per se, or I want to start the opposite way, because you don't know what the digest is. And we don't want to create tags for these other artifact types. They're really attributes of the container image in this case. So your tag listing, we're trying to keep clean because we already have thousands upon thousands of tags as people automate their builds. We're trying not to pollute that with all kinds of other references. The tag listings are the things that users want to think about, and how do we add metadata to those? So with that, let's drill into some demos here. And so what in the ORA's artifact spec, there is a docs folder that we've got a quick start there. And I'll just use this to walk through. And I should have, is any questions so far before I drill in any further? I think a demo will speak, a lot more than you'll have context. So then we do have an instance of Docker distribution, CNCF distribution that supports this capability, and we'll talk more about that. But you don't need to connect to Azure or somebody else at any point. You can just run this locally, and you have full capability. So we'll build an image, and we'll push it to our local registry. And of course, our image is just. I'm actually using localhost here. I have another one where I actually pull a fully qualified domain with a host entry that maps it, but we'll keep it simple. So now I've got that container image in there. I want to push some other content. So I'm just going to create some files. In fact, I'll just do them both here. And if we look, I now have this SBOM as signature, and it could be a YAML file. It could be a picture. It could be a video of my friends, whatever. The point is there is one or more files that I want to push into the registry and associate them with the net monitor image. So we've implemented this with ORAs, but we're just using distribution APIs. So in fact, the push is pretty straightforward. The push actually uses the standard upload APIs of the registry. All we've done, I'll just give myself some room here, is added parsing logic that knows how to process a new manifest type. It's really the internals of the distribution has been updated, but the upload APIs have not been changed. And I can push, the other one also. And if we look close at this, all we're saying is push to this repository. There's no tag, right? Because we don't want a tag for these two files. Give it an artifact type so I know what this thing is. I want to say this is an SBOM. I want to say this is a signature. We're using examples here to not get into any project specific ones. And then what we're saying is, by the way, when you upload this file, associate it with the image. This is the subject property. That's at the end of the day, that is one of the main additions that that drove kind of a lot of the scenarios. I want to add a new artifact to the registry and associate it with something that's already there. So that's the subject image. And now because we've done it this way, if I look at the tags, I still only see that one tag, right? This is not pushed with a tag, it's pushed as a digest, and it says, go reference that image. Now, the other half of the story is it's great if I could push stuff into a registry that could reference other things, but can I get it out? So the other addition is this ORA's artifacts refers API. And all we've done is say there is a manifest API, off the path. So it's the root is ORA's artifacts v1. Then what is the repo? And for registries that support nested namespaces, this could just go on and on and on. I think the max is 256. Use the manifest API. Take the digest. Now, in this case, it's the digest of the image. right? So we want to make sure that we're only referencing digest, because that's the only way you have unique identifiers in the registry. Tags are mutable. So we want to be able to get the digest for it and then list out whoever's referencing that image. So I'll get the digest, and then I'm going to curl the list of manifests for that digest. So you'll notice here, here's the two ones we pushed up. We pushed up a signature example and an SBOM example. And these are the digests of the actual manifest that we pushed. So if I wanted to pull this, the SBOM, the SBOM, I can figure the artifact type is what differentiates it. So in the OCI artifacts, we use the config media type, which means we're kind of overloading the config object and we require a null config, which has been problematic for people. In this case, we first class the experience that it actually is an artifact type. And now with that, I can, I can pull it, but I could also get a filtered list. So if we look at this one, the only difference between this and this is we passed in a filter artifact type SBOM example. So notice I'm only getting the SBOM back. I'm not getting the signature. So now we're starting to get into server-side search and filtering and so forth. That is, the other big piece that's missing in registries in a standards way. We all implement it in our custom way, but what is the standards way to do that? Now, we of course don't want users to be thinking about digest and having to do curls and digest and so forth. So, or as we just implemented this with a discover, and actually let me pull the filter off because that makes it a little more interesting. So we've added a discover API with a tree output. So now I can see for the net monitor image, here's a signature, there's the digest, here's an SBOM, there's the digest. So you can start to see the depth of what we've got in a registry. And again, if we look at the tags listing, we see that it's very clean. And then lastly, a pull is again, straightforward. If you're pulling a manifest, those APIs exist. The manifest explains the content that's in it. And I can now do an, or actually, sorry, let me, sorry. Let me delete these two and run that again. And now we can see that, we have the SBOM there. So that's the meat of the demo. I see Brandon jumped in. So let me pause there because usually I think this context video means I'm about to talk. So please, by all means, that's what I have so far. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
No, mainly video for me just meant that I need to fix my lighting before I turn it on. I do have a bunch of questions, but I want to save those for like the more specky questions and leave this open for anybody who's got demo questions first.
Can you override? Can you somehow override that signature, or is it immutable?
So that's a great question. So if you think about the way registries work, where at the end of the day, they're digest, and digests are not mutable. So you can add as many signatures you want. You could add as many SBOMs as you want. The model that we're doing here is we let each artifact type deal with its type. And again, that's why we think the artifact type property is so important. So in fact, we've had this exact conversation about signatures, because the way signatures work is there's timestamps embedded in the signature itself. So even if I sign the exact same container image or SBOM or anything, a millisecond later, or 2 milliseconds, whatever, I'll get a new manifest and a new signature, which is a new manifest and a new digest. So I will actually get multiples. It's up to you how you want to parse that for the signature type or the SBOM, because it is valid to have multiple well, it's more valid to have multiple scan results is the most obvious scenario for the same image, but I'll have multiple signatures also. The way we think about the signatures is there's signatures by different entities. So if you think about, where's my, oh, actually there's one more thing I want to show, but Here, there's a Wabbit network signature. Now there's a Docker Hub signature. Now there's an Acme Rocket signature for import. Then there's another Acme Rocket signature for dev, staging, prod. And the idea is those would have, sorry, let me get to the examples. In this case, there is an annotation that says CNCF signature subject, and that could say Wabbit networks. It could say Acme Rockets. The important piece of this is what we've done is we've formalized artifact type, and we're trying to generalize annotations, because if you look at the way the refers API did for filtering, it says, hey, give me only the artifact types that match a certain thing. But I also want some other interesting information, and every artifact will have its own way of being decide how it's interesting. So that's where we want to leverage annotations and let registries opt into annotation filtering in addition to artifact type filtering. So that's one way how you might differentiate different signatures, was really the answer I was trying to give.
Yeah, I think that was basically enough. Yeah.
Sorry, finish up, Milo.
No, I was just gonna say that was basically my question, like whether there can be just one signature or multiple signatures, or if someone can just like delete the existing one and replace it with some rogue one, you know, things like that.
Well, you think about it, what makes a signature, right? It's not, so this is what's funny when I look at some of these Gartner and other things, like I must have signed content. Well, signed by who, right? It can be signed by Evil Co. And that doesn't make, yeah, it's signed, that doesn't make it good. So it's not just that it's signed, but it's signed by an entity that I trust. Now, if somebody steals the public keys, the private keys, yeah, you have problems. And that's what revocation and other scenarios are made for. There's a bunch of details into the signing. So I'd rather not get into the details, because I wanted to, that's really up to the artifact type. Each one of them have their own ways of dealing with it. Purely from a registry perspective, yes, you could have lots of references. They could be the same type, and we leave it to the artifact author to define how they want to differentiate multiple types associated with the same one. I'm just showing annotations as an example of one way that you could do that.
So right now in the spec, you've only got the artifact type listed in there as one of the filters. Is that, you're saying you're thinking about
Correct.
this
In the
as like a
refers
specific
API,
implementation? Yeah.
So if you look at the refers API, there is may implement artifact type filtering.
Yeah, but no annotation filtering. Yeah.
I want to take a little bite first and see how people swallow
Okay.
it. This has been, and this is why I really want to go back to the distribution. These folks here, distribution implementations, there's distribution spec, which we get confused on when I say distribution. CNCF distribution implementations. How do you feel about this? And what would you like to see as the next piece? Well, first, would you like this? And then if so, what do you think about annotation filtering and so forth?
I mean, this is kind of interesting. I mean, annotation filtering, I just like, I'm kind of curious, like, opening the annotation floodgates turned out to be both great and a terrible idea in Kubernetes space, like, because whenever something had to be done, it's like, oh, annotations were one of the first tools to grab. It's like, yeah, cool. And then you just end up with these like loads of annotations on random objects and stuff like that. But
and I agree. Like, there's a lot of discussions there. This into Brandon's point. Like, I wanted to not get bike shedded on the annotation conversation just yet. Right now, the way we think about it in notation in Notary is it'll be a client-side filtering. So we don't expect to get thousands of signatures to the same artifact. And because we start with the net monitor image, then there might be dozens. In most cases, there's probably 1 to 3. But even if there's dozens, it's not that big a deal. And we're deferring to client-side filtering on the annotation for the subject. But if people like this, I'd like to get into more annotations. And then what is the max length of an annotation? What's the expectation for filtering? Because now what you're really saying is I want all the artifacts in a registry that match this annotation. That's a very different thing, which I love the idea, and we need to add that for things like lifecycle management, but crawl, walk, run. Right now, I'm just trying to crawl with some basic capabilities.
I would just not talk about annotation filtering because it's not in scope of draft one. And we've spent a lot of time trying to get draft one agreed upon with a lot of folks. So let's track it as another issue inside this and then come back to annotation filtering if and when we want it. That's my take on this.
So for people on the distribution side, if you're looking at this and think you're going to have 5-10 signatures on one of these images, however people design it, is a whole lot of those back and forth round trips a concern to you, or you're just, whatever? Because it would have to, you're going to get a list of about 10 of these things. And unlike when you get a list of all of the tags on image and you pick the one tag you want, when you get a list of all the artifacts, you have to query every one of those artifacts to see, okay, does this one have the right annotations or not?
I mean, those round trip would be annoying.
You're muted. Yes.
Sorry, I was just saying, like, all those round trips would be like, yeah, not ideal.
So unfortunately, Michael was gonna, Michael Brown from ECR was gonna talk about that tomorrow. He was away for the weekend. I don't think he's awake at 7 a.m. So, we did want to, he actually spent a lot of time drilling into the refers API response. Where we landed is a balance of round trips and the amount of data that would be responded. Registries support those round trips today. You start with the tag, you get a digest, you get the manifest, and then the client, when the manifest comes back, it's got a list of descriptors on it. The client says, how many of those descriptors do I have? Because I might have already pre-cached some of them. Oh, I already have the Debian base image. I already have the Java runtime. I actually just need the one application layer. So it knows how to go back and says, well, actually of the 5 layers that are in this manifest, I actually only need 1. So those round trips are pretty a regular part of registries. And while there's still some optimizations that you could do, we really wanted to focus on what the core capabilities were. And in all fairness, like, we just haven't seen that be a big of a problem. We know it's a theoretical one around, not theoretical, I mean, it is a practical one on, it meant to be practical, not theoretical, on the number of round trips, but in the scope of what content you're trying to retrieve, it hasn't been a blocking or otherwise difficult issue for users. And this is how Helm works today. This is how every other container image works today.
So looking at the API, everything in there was under the ORAS namespace from the top of the paths there. How do you see this when we're eventually going to hopefully take this to the OCI group and try to get this pulled back in upstream? Is this going to be the final name, or are we going to have something that changes when we go upstream?
It's hard to say. I mean, that's like, we wanted to put this under the V2 namespace, but until we get agreement, we don't want to be in this spot where you're violating the APIs and so forth. So where we put it in a place that we know is unique, we know is not in conflict, and if and when that gets pulled up, then we can deal with it at that point. If you look at registries today, 99.9% of the content in a registry is actually through the Docker manifests. And I don't know how much V1 APIs are obviously not used anymore, or hopefully not used in most registries. Those are details that we hope will get reconciled, but we're kind of really focused on what is the end user experience, and the dozen registries that implement these details will deal with whatever we wind up settling on. Right now, that's the stable API.
Okay.
Last year, we went and implemented on top of the manifest API, on top of distribution, and we got feedback from Vincent and folks to kind of use some kind of extensibility KPI on top of distribution, which doesn't exist. So while that PR is getting sorted out, we left it implemented under a route that can be moved. So We assume that this route might change or might not change at this point. But we wanted to give a kind of a start point for the draft and then say that as issues come and as we finalize this, we can move this around. But the way we did it is so that the API from Manifest can be expanded under the distribution spec if needed. But to Steve's point, it's open for discussion going forward when we collapse it. But none of the tooling stops it from being under any part. There are some discussions around permission model, because once we move it out of V2 and out of the repository namespace, then the tokens for distribution kind of like should they be honored and things like that. And those would be the determining factors of whether we would want to move it under directly under /manifest or keep it under something else, primarily for the ACLs. Yeah, but the short answer is it's yet to be decided, but this is a proposal to start with.
Yeah, I'm wondering how many people have policies on accessing a registry that look for that V2 path and things just break if you start putting it other places, is my concern.
We haven't seen pathing on namespacing because every registry implements their own APIs. Like ACR has its own path that we use for like all the gaps, such as search and filtering and catalog API. Well, variations on the catalog API. We all have custom APIs. What we do see is customers configure DNS things, DNS configurations for the data endpoint and the REST APIs.
Yeah, I'm thinking less of the clouds and more of the companies that have provisioned their own registry and their own cluster, and they'll have an ingress route or something like that that's set up that says, here's how you get to the registry.
Look, we want to put this under, the goal has always been to put this under the distribution spec, but there's no extensibility API. There's no agreement yet. There's no way for us to have a solid place to run. So this is what we're doing until we can unblock ourselves there.
Yeah, and the other concern I have saying, okay, this is a path that can move around, is at some point things are going to get published under one of those paths. And once you start publishing things out there and people rely on it, you're stuck with that path.
You're stuck with, the Docker APIs live in other API paths also. So I think the clients will need to know, hey, let me try this, whatever the new thing is, let me look there. If it's not there, all right, let me fall back and see if it's in the old path. It's not the best. We're shooting for the best. We haven't gotten the best. We're settling on what works.
Yeah.
But Brandon, I think you're right. We will pin to some draft or some specific release of the specification for this path. I don't think I can publish clients or take dependency on clients that are fully configurable as well. We did. I think the ingress controller routing was exactly what Vincent was talking about for the ACLs, and the issue is still open under the distribution spec. I would hopefully like to see some traction on that issue, and if we get some resolution, then agree to put it there as a part of the merge pack. We're kind of on the same space that we want to make sure we unify.
That's why it's a draft, right? It's like we're really, 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 really close. And if you look, there was some issues on the media types, finalize the media types. And until we get that solved, we encourage folks to help us get that solved. But at the end of the day, we'll want to make sure, is this even interesting? Because I don't want to argue over a name if the experience isn't interesting. If the experience is interesting and the capabilities are interesting, then solving the name problem is easy. And let me just show one more thing, just because there was one more slide on the other side of the demo. And this is the next stuff that we're about to do, is once you have because one of the questions I get into is, well, why do you need the registry to know about the references versus a client knowing about them? There's a couple of pieces. One is the lifecycle management. I want to be able to say in a registry, when I delete the net monitor image, all the goo that goes with it should go with it, right? And registries can choose, we tweaked it to say from should to may. But the idea is all that graph of content is not interesting outside of the image itself or whatever the subject is. The other is, how do I copy this between registries? Promote it, sorry, practice my promotion word. So we can do promotion of an image by Docker pull, Docker tag, Docker push. But what happens when I want to take an entire graph of content and move it across? So what we've been working on, and this has been in PowerPoint, it's turning into code, where I can say copy from a source to a destination. And this actually should have a tag on it, I just realized. So copy the NetMonitor V1 image to the Acme Rockets registry. And because we can read the refers API, I don't need to call the notation CLI to copy the signatures. I don't need to call the SBOM APIs to call this the SBOM client, and then go back to notation again for the SBOMs. The idea is we want generic registry APIs so that you can copy and promote this content across. If I sit in File Explorer, I call CP on my computer, I don't have to call the Office APIs to copy a PowerPoint file across. I say, hey, file system, copy this from here to there. And there's generic APIs that understand that entire graph. That's really the target scenario that we're trying to enable. And then you can then start to do include references, exclude references, and you can do that kind of details as well. So that's part of what rounds out the intent of having this in the registry as opposed to leaving it to clients to figure out on their own. And that really is the end of my talk, the presentation. Did we lose you, Wayne?
Wayne's possibly checking his mic. The stuff we've got in there today, we're looking at just pointing from the artifact to blobs. We're not going to manifest in the spec, right? So.
You're kind of said it the opposite way. So today, each thing that you put in a registry is thought of as a manifest.
So
because that's the life cycle of it. So you're asking,
so the artifact can refer to a manifest, but the artifact contains blobs, right?
Correct. Correct.
And
so if you look close, this has got a signature, it's a blob. And it actually, I just noticed this says reference. It's supposed to say subject. Okay.
Yeah.
Some of my slides are slide. It also, so the subject, oh no, it does, and it's the subject. Okay, anyway, this is the subject property and it points back up. I think what you're asking is, can a manifest, can a new thing be assigned to a layer as opposed to a manifest itself? Like, can
I have an artifact that contains a pointer to a Helm chart or maybe a CNAB bundle that has pointers to other images out there, not refers, but actually children. And so as layers of my artifact. And I get the feeling the answer is no from looking at the spec, but I'm just curious if that's even.
Well, it depends. That's what I'm trying to figure. You've got a couple of pieces. So the Helm scenario where a Helm chart refers to container images, that's not supported today because that got, honestly, it just got bike shedded on permissions and like annotations. I want to add that, but I think we had to show more progress before I could take on that problem. So there's no weak references across repos today. That doesn't exist because of the auth challenges that in the valid challenges. I think they're overcomable, resolvable. Because if I tell a Kubernetes cluster to deploy a Helm chart, that Helm chart could refer to multiple images or even a kube deployment. That's a permission thing. It either gets resolved or not.
Let me change the example because I actually don't like Helm because I've got other concerns on that one.
Okay.
But to think of like the CNAB bundle, where the CNAB says I've got multiple images that is part of this thing. And so it's, are we creating something that could be that generic object that the OCI indexes, we're debating whether it is or not. Could artifact be that generic object, or are we saying no, artifact can only point to blobs?
No, I do think we, go ahead, Sajay.
Let me answer the question. Today we looked at SBOM. So specifically, if you look at the slide, the SBOM can have a signature. The SBOM may be first class through a tag, but the SBOM is an artifact, so it can have a blob itself, and it can have a subject that's pointing to an image, but you can push in another signature that points to the SBOM. That's how you enter, like create children for the respective artifacts. the one conversation that we initially started with in the first implementation was we had multiple subjects where one artifact could potentially point to multiple. We took that off just to keep it simple and start with, can we get the signature pointing to one image as a start point? We are not solving the problem of what index does, which is index can point to multiple images and create many, I mean, they can have like a full graph starting from the top, right? We stepped away from that primarily because we wanted to kind of like focus on getting the signature part done. But there's nothing stopping us from going ahead and defining that you can use this to point to multiple subjects. So for CNAB will be your deployment entry point. And you want to have CNAB pointing to multiple images. But the problem with the OCI index right now is the same issue, which is it doesn't have a placeholder for config. Maybe that's the way that we can uplift this, or maybe have other attributes on the index itself. So they are mutually exclusive in some way.
There's also debates from the index side of whether or not that should be allowed to point to blobs. So you couldn't really put a config in there necessarily in the OCI index.
Exactly.
Depending on who you talk to.
Yeah, I mean, you started to tease into compatibility of the existing manifest, but this is, if you back in Artifacts PR 27, this is what we were targeting. So in this case, it was a CNAB that had a Helm chart that had multiple graphs. So I think I would like to solve this problem. I believe it can be added to the artifact manifest. But these are all additive scenarios. And I think the question we're really trying to get to is like, is the base a good start? If we like the base and we keep on talking about, that's great, but I want more, that's an awesome conversation. So that's kind of really my question. If we want more, awesome, let's keep on going down that path.
To me, it was more just clarifying, are we making that generic thing or not? There are concerns if you really go the generic route when Justin was coming up with possible looping scenarios that would break the garbage collection. So I don't think we want to get into some of those paths. And so that would be an issue if we try to point to manifest, but there's also some value that some people might want to get out of this if it was a more generic object.
I mean, if you look at all of these, and this is really old, so it's the pointers aren't, the properties aren't necessarily right. But if you look really close at this, all of these are artifacts pointing at other artifacts. That's because those are the things that we think about from a lifecycle management. The blobs that make up an artifact, those are implementation details of that thing. So I believe that the manifest that we've been building on has this potential to be able to support these kind of scenarios. I just want to make sure that people are comfortable with the base that we're starting with. So,
so looking at the demo, we pointed to a couple of JSON files and had some JSON in there. Are we tied to having JSON content that might wrap something else, or is it really just any arbitrary content that you could put a raw, whatever binary file in that artifact blob?
I mean, it's like artifacts today, right? It's a blob. Whatever you want to put in it. I use JSON because it was simple. It's like you could put video clips, you can put multiple files. You know, if you look at the way Helm works, they use a provenance file and a Helm chart. I don't even know if they go in the same directory or not. So it doesn't matter the file type.
The reason for the question is I know there's some people on various registries that like to go into those blobs and parse apart the JSON or decide whether or not it is a valid media type that they want to support on their registry. And so I'm just pulling apart whether that's valid here or not.
The blob is just another descriptor on the blob API. It follows the get layer semantic. There's no difference.
Yeah.
I mean, this is also part of what, let me get into the spec here for a second. This is why the artifact type property is so important, because it allows you to decide, you know, based on the artifact type, what do I expect in those blobs? So for instance, a security scanner is going to want to look at the content, but they're going to want to know, is this a container image? Is this a Helm chart? Is this a WASM? Is this, you know, a remote desktop video feed? Okay, I don't care about that. So being able to pivot on the artifact type allows you to know what they should expect at the next level. And of course, the descriptor media types on the layers are also helpful as well.
Does that tee that one up? Anyone else on the distribution side concerns one way or another on that? Okay, just throwing it out there. Go ahead, Wayne.
I don't have a whole lot of bandwidth to like comprehend the entirety of like the artifact proposal here. I find the discussion very interesting because I think that it will have consequences for some of the things that my team does have to deal with, which like was mentioned earlier, garbage collection, and how do we know that a blob is like related to something that is referenceable by the user that we shouldn't delete during garbage collection, if that makes sense. And that's like, just from that point of view, I think one thing that would help in the spec is guidance as far as that goes.
That's great.
If that exists already. I see there's a lifecycle management section, but I think that was mostly just pointing to, oh, okay, it does mention garbage collection. I might have been looking at a different doc.
This has been the subject of debate. I purposely called it lifecycle management because GC is an implementation detail. And that is a place where registries, I don't know if they're really trying to differentiate that much, but because it wasn't defined in initial specs, we've all varied in different places. So there's two parts to it. One, we feel it's important that if we're going to add references in a registry because of garbage collection and others, that the registry opts into that behavior. Like it shouldn't just drift into the registry and users have expectations that, hey, I pushed this property name refers into it and it just magically works. Like the registry should opt in, says you're giving me something that you're expecting me to do something with. It's not just the refers API, it's, hey, I need to keep this content around for some life cycle. So we did put this description in here that helps with that. The new manifest API, it's a first-class property for the subject property. What we've done then is in the distribution implementation, there's a fork of Aura. There's a fork of distribution under the Auras project that you might have seen. We've been working on this and we wanted to push it up to main as an optional feature. We've gotten pretty far with it. There's more work to be done. Like we're not ready to have it merged into main. And there's definitely a call for help here. The details, though, are an implementation so that you can understand what that index is, what that life cycle should be. So there is work here that, and you saw when I did the refers API on my local machine, that was using this code base. So that work is there. There's Avril has done the majority of the work. He's gotten to a stable point, and honestly, we had to get back to getting ACR working. So we've gotten it this far. We'd love to get support from anybody that wants to party on distribution that takes it to the next level to finish that work, because there are many registries that based on distribution that will still have their own work to finish, but there is having this base there will really help people get started.
So
Cool.
Putting on my tester hat, if we name a repository manifest, does that break any of this?
No.
Sajay?
No, this is following the same naming pattern as distribution does. So the segmentation is from the back. So initially we did have it on the manifest handler itself and under the manifest itself, so that you could name it blob, you can name it manifest, and none of those APIs should break.
Okay.
Is there any concern on GC? Because we've had multiple feedback where folks don't want to talk about GC, folks want to talk about GC. And Steve has been pushed around multiple times to add items, remove items. We want to keep it as minimal as possible, but not call out exactly how it should be implemented. So feedback is welcome. We would like to understand what implementers would like to see in the spec as well.
Yeah, I guess my main concern when it comes to garbage collection isn't garbage collection itself, but just having an efficient way in the distribution implementation to understand what, I guess to understand not necessarily the graph of related things, because I don't really care so much about the structure so much as what points to a given blob, transitively, like all the way to like the final leaf in the tree of things that points to it, so that when it comes to our garbage collection implementation, we can make decisions that don't result in customer data loss.
Makes sense. So, and we are going through the same internal GC conversations, and I can share some parts of it. So we have the new manifest, which is honestly the differences are being called out. There is a blobs collection in there, as well as there's a subject property in there. The way we're doing it is we keep track of the root subject with the unique document ID. So because you can push the manifest again with the same SHA, right? So that if you delete the manifest and push the root manifest, we don't want ghosted artifacts. So we decided that there is a internal manifest ID that keeps track of it. All the referer manifests are hanging off that root manifest, and everything else is tracked like regular blobs. As long as you can get to the root manifest somehow that the blob is tracked with, we mark it as live. And internally, we have something called a reconciler that goes and kind of marks these blobs as needed. So that's what we thought about. So when the root manifest is deleted, let's say the image manifest is dropped, we immediately mark all the other child manifests that have that as subject for deletion. And that's a one-shot delete HTTP API. And then the blobs are kind of like marked for deletion going forward. Today, indexes have a problem where if you delete the index, you cannot delete the resulting images because you can have those dangling around and referenced by digest individually. That's the other thing why we wanted to make this call up front, where if you're deleting net monitor v1 on the top, everything else is transitively deleted as well, as an expectation, and that's called out in the recommendation per se. But if any of those manifests themselves have a tag, they will not be deleted. They will be still accessible using the regular tag API. Those are the two
They get a
things.
ref count, if you think about it.
Yeah, from the client side, the implementation on the servers, I see it as a little bit of a server implementation, but I would love to see OCI come up and say, this is what is possible for the registry to delete. This is what would be valid for the registry to delete under you. Just from my awareness, so I know how to interact with the registry. And so it'd be nice if we did that. I don't think it necessarily needs to be something artifact spec does. I think that needs to be distribution spec. Might need to take up another version or something like that and add that definition.
You're touching on all the same things that we obviously would like to do as well. There's many of these things. In fact, everything here, I think, should merge into the distribution spec, in my opinion, including the OCI artifacts. It was always my intent, it was a matter of like, hey, is this thing real? Do we want to do that yet? The API, I would hope it's not an extension API. I hope it just be part of the registry. I'd love for the lifecycle management to be part of the registry definitions as well. Right now, basically, the artifact spec is our sandbox to validate all of those conversations. And if various registries start implementing it and find this to be the valid use case, then that's good feedback. And we're at 8 o'clock, so I'm guessing that's why Milos had to drop. Anything, so well, I don't know if you guys have our time box, but we definitely want to continue the conversation, whether it be in GitHub with issues in Slack or whatever. To figure out what, most of what I keep on hearing is we want more. We want to move under OCI, which we agree. Do we have enough to start?
I don't have answers on the distribution side. I'm looking forward to seeing something like this actually pulled under OCI though.
Great. One of the things that we did want to make sure though is this was, managed under, a neutral governance. So all of this is under, or as is under CNCF. So we do have that part covered. So it's not like this is Microsoft owned by any means. In fact, Microsoft and AWS have been, and Docker, but Microsoft and AWS being pretty fierce competitors, have been the majority of contributors to this work so far. So it's definitely intended as vendor neutral, and we're running under CNCF, so we're open for all feedback, and we'll keep on going wherever it can go. So for the sake of time, I'll end here, and maybe we'll do it at a different time slot for some of the Pacific Coast people, because I think Sajay hasn't gone to sleep yet. I'm guessing he's been up all night rather than getting up early. So thanks, folks. We'll speak to you later.
Yep, thanks. Appreciate it.